you remember that what we were saying earlier, as we manifest a radiant heart, we take action to heal the planet, and we do it as a form of spiritual practice. We want to express our love for God and neighbor in tangible action. We want to bear witness to the love that sent us into the world and that will gather us up at our journey's end. So how do we do that? This is where it gets like rubber meets the road. What can we do, and what are we called to do? Well, as members of the Episcopal Church, one place to start is to take the pledge to creation care. If you visit the Episcopal Church's webpage on creation care, or episcopalchurch.org, you're going to have a handout with this. You don't have to write it down. episcopalchurch.org/creation care. You can decide how you wish to cultivate a life-giving, loving, and liberating relationship with creation. You can make a pledge of what you feel called to do. And that web page has lots of good resources for us to use. The Episcopal Church is also unrolling across its many dioceses a carbon tracker called Sustaining Earth, Our Island Home. The carbon tracker shows how each household can make smarter choices around energy use, and in many cases save money in the process. It turns out that if everyone in the United States made better choices in 5 basic areas of our ordinary everyday life, in how we heat and cool our homes, in our transportation, in the source of our electricity, in our choices around what we eat, and in what we do about our waste, our recycling. If we made changes, if everyone across the United States made good changes in those 5 areas of our ordinary life, it would reduce our national carbon emissions by 40%. That's huge. So this means that as we cut our carbon footprint and do everything we can in our own household to keep fossil fuels in the ground and work toward better solutions, it not only has symbolic value, it not only means that we're living in greater moral integrity, we're living more in alignment with our own values, it also can make a substantive difference. So if Sustain Island Home has not yet come to your diocese, if you haven't heard of it, it means it probably hasn't come to your diocese. So if it hasn't come to your diocese, I would encourage you to, if you're willing, to contact your bishop and say, hey, I'm interested in supporting Sustain Island Home. What's your plan about when you want to introduce it to the diocese? So what are some of the concrete things we can do? Maybe we can plant trees, save trees, recycle more, drive less, drive electric. Maybe we can eat local, eat organic, waste less food, eat less meat, and move to a plant-based diet. It turns out that eating less meat that's something you can start doing today. That's one of the most immediate and effective ways that many of us can cut back on our carbon emissions. We can avoid plastic as much as possible. Maybe we can support local farms and land trusts. We can fly less, and if we have to fly, we can buy carbon offsets from a reputable group. The one that I'm using is TerraPass.com, Terrapass.com. Maybe we can afford solar panels and move toward a carbon neutral home. If we have financial investments, we can divest from fossil fuels. And if we are college graduates, we can push our alma mater to divest from fossil fuels. I believe that the number right now, just in recent years, we've come to the point of something like $11 trillion have now been divested from fossil fuels. This is an extraordinary movement that's taken hold around the world. Faith communities have a particular role to play in the climate crisis. For starters, we need good preaching. And I'm curious, how many of you have ever heard a good, strong sermon about climate change?
You better raise your hand.
I'm seeing 1, 2, 3, I'm seeing a sprinkling of hands. Most hands are not raised, and that is what I've often found in talking to groups in the Episcopal Church. It's kind of astonishing, like we don't dare talk about this in church, much less in our pulpit. So I believe we need preachers who are willing to step forward and get into the pulpit and speak about our spiritual and moral call to protect God's creation, to take part in the healing of the earth. This is central to who we are as Christians. And you know, a lot of preachers are afraid to do it. I mean, honestly. Why? Because it might be divisive, because it might be seen as being too political, because we might lose important pledges. You know, there's all kinds of anxiety that can come up for a preacher. So if you are convinced that preaching about climate change is central, needed, vital, urgently necessary today in our church, I hope you will go to your preacher, whoever he or she is, and give them some support, give them some love, give them some encouragement. Say, you've got their back if they take the risk of stepping into the pulpit. And there are also things that clergy can do before getting into the pulpit. I mean, we can hold adult ed conversations. You can bring in a climate scientist to say, yo, you might be interested in having a little talk here in this congregation about what actually is going on with the climate. So it's not, the burden isn't just on the clergy. But I hope you'll find a way to encourage your clergy to preach. You know, as they know, that God entrusted the world to our care, and that according to Genesis, our first task, the first job that human beings were given, was to tend and protect the creation that God pronounced very good. They know, as you know, that right now we might as well be running Genesis backwards, because human beings are pushing one creature after another over the brink, over the edge, and we are actively dismantling the web of life. So the climate crisis is not, it's not a narrowly partisan issue. It's not just a political issue or an economic issue. It is a spiritual issue. It is a moral issue. It's an existential issue, calling all people of faith and goodwill to rise up and take action. So I hope you will find ways in your home churches to weave care of creation into every aspect of your congregation's life, into its preaching and its praying, into its Sunday schools and its adult education. And there are all kinds of resources available to us. There are resources for prayer, learning, action, and advocacy. For example, if you go to the website for the Episcopal Diocese of Western Massachusetts, look under creation care. We've got lots of material that is good, not just in my local setting of Western Mass, but useful all over. You can find good resources at Green Faith, at Earth Ministry, at Interfaith Power and Light, and I have some links also on my own website, revivingcreation.org. So get creative. You could hold a contemplative Eucharist that celebrates the earth and gives people a chance to grieve and to reflect and to find renewal in the presence of God. You could organize an outdoor worship service that celebrates God's beautiful creation and lifts up our call to protect it. You could open it to the public. And even better, you could make it an interfaith service. If your church has some land, maybe you can cultivate a landscape that sequesters carbon and provides food for the homeless or low-income families. Maybe you can do, if you haven't already, do some composting or tree planting or habitat restoration, permaculture gardening, growing produce for food pantries. I know so many churches just have these expanses of lawn. It's like, lawn? What is with lawn? Lose the lawn. You know, lawn, it should be garden. It should be food. It should be solar panels. It should be something. But, you know, you think of all the water and the fertilizer and the stuff that goes into lawns and the mowing. So many reasons to lose the lawn. There's so much we can do. And individual actions are important, but Bill McGibbon famously said, when he was asked, what can individuals do? What should individuals do? His response was, stop being an individual. Stop being an individual. We need collective action. We need to remember how much we belong to each other, and that because of the scale of the crisis in which we find ourselves, we need collective solutions. So we're going to need to use our voices and our votes to make it politically possible to do what is scientifically necessary. So I urge you to cast your vote, not only in the 2020 presidential election, but also in every election, municipal, statewide, national, for candidates who take the climate crisis seriously and who have a good plan to address it. And thanks be to God, there are coalitions of people growing among people of faith and goodwill who care about the earth, about poverty and economic justice, about racial justice, about immigration and human rights. All these issues intersect, and it's one of the most beautiful things that's happening really in the last few years is watching these coalitions begin to come together. We begin to realize we can't just do silos where the people who care about the earth are the white, wealthy people who only care about polar bears in Alaska. I care about polar bears in Alaska, but I care about a whole lot more, and I think we all do. So to have these movements coming together it's powerful, because it's really, we're only going to do this together if we're going to do this at all. We need to douse the fires of climate change, and we also need to douse the fire of hatred. So many people of faith are excited about the Green New Deal, which is the first resolution to address the climate crisis with the urgency and comprehensiveness that the situation requires. Both Green Faith and Interfaith Power and Light have statements on their websites that we can sign to show that people of faith support the goals and values of the Green New Deal. I think of the Green New Deal as, because it addresses both the climate crisis and inequality, to me it is a good response to what Pope Francis called, what liberation theologians before him called, responding to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. We need to respond to both those cries.
Could you explain what that is, the Green New Deal?
The Green New Deal is, it's not a set piece of legislation, but it's an aspirational goal saying we have to tackle the climate crisis, we have to do that, and we also have to tackle social inequality and economic inequality, and we have to do it at the same time. And I'm seeing evidence of that more and more just as I read the newspapers. For example, when they turn off PG&E had to turn off electricity in California because of these uninsulated wires that could spark wildfires. So millions of people losing power in California, which I understand that's what they needed to do for fear of sparking more fires. But that decision affects the poor so much harder than it affects wealthy people. Wealthy people might have their solar panels and their batteries. They don't care if they lose a refrigerator's worth of food or a freezer's worth of food. They can just go buy more. And the poor people who are barely just hanging on by their fingernails, or the small businesses, they're losing so much more. There are many more examples like that about how unevenly the climate crisis is affecting everybody, but when it's a situation where already there are deep social inequalities, those people who are most vulnerable, the low income, the historically underserved and marginalized, those folks are going to suffer first and hardest from the effects of climate change. So it's very important that we remember that everyone needs to be protected. Everyone's going to need good health care. Just think of these climate disasters. Everyone's going to need good health care. In a sort of chaotic social time, we need to assure that people are going to be taken care of. So that's kind of the vision of it. And they have to work out the details of how what does the policy look like. But I trust the vision, and the values behind it to me seem deeply Judeo-Christian. just very much in alignment with who we are. Now is a really good time to join the climate movement. And if I was going to say just where do you start to do that, I would just start up with, very simple, go to 350.org and sign up for their newsletter. 350.org is the first global climate action network. What does the number 350 stand for? It stands for the uppermost level of parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that is safe for life to continue as it has evolved. So another way to say it is 350 is the number that represents safety. If we had a planet that had, on average, 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, that's the safe upper limit for life in the world in which we were born to continue as it has. So what's the level today? Last May, it was over 414 parts per million. So that number is we're over the safe limit, and that number is only going to rise, at least for a while. I mean, even if we stopped burning fossil fuels today, it would still rise for a while because there's a lag between the time of the actual burning the fuels and then how it affects the atmosphere. So bottom line is we've got work to do. We've got work to do. We've got to keep fossil fuels in the ground where they belong. We've got to make a swift transition to clean, safe, renewable energy and do that in a way that includes all people. So we must join this struggle. It's a blessed and holy struggle to protect the earth and her communities, human and other than human. And this, as I see it, this is our deep spiritual practice. Something we can do mindfully and gratefully and with love in our hearts for God and God's creation. So I'm going to close. I'm going to close with a quote and then a question. The quote is by the climate justice writer named Mary Anais Hegler. And she writes, "Even if I can only save a sliver of what is precious to me, that will be my sliver, and I will cherish it. If I can salvage just one blade of grass, I will do it. I will make a world out of it, and I will live in it and for it." So here's my question. What are your next steps in taking action to address the climate crisis? What is God calling you to do? Thank you.
Reveal to me a melody to glorify your name, to glorify your name forever. Reveal to me a melody to glorify